human rights defender with over 48 years of movement work in the United States and internationally. Ajamu is on the Executive Committee of the U.S. Peace Council, the leadership body of the United National Anti-War Coalition, the steering committee of the Black is Back Coalition, and national organizer for the Black Alliance for Peace. Ajamu is an editor and contributing columnist for the Black Agenda Report and contributing columnist for Counterpunch. He was recently awarded the Serena Schern Award for Uncompromised Integrity in Journalism. And last but not least, he was the vice presidential candidate with Jill Stein in the 2016 presidential race. Let's please give it up for Ajamu Baraka.
All power to the people. All power to the people. We must understand that when we say all power to the people, that that's more than just a slogan. It is a call to action. It is an expression of our values. It is an objective we must have if we're serious about radical change here in this country. So our responsibilities as citizens of empire is in fact to build movement that shifts power from the oppressor, from the exploiters, back to the people. So my friends, I want to thank you for allowing me the honor to come before you to talk about our common interests and our common experiences, attempting to build a party that responds to the objective needs of the people in this country who are looking for radical, for revolutionary change here in this country. In my short comments, I want to just provide a context, and then I'm going to talk about three areas that I think that we have to concentrate on to build the party that the people are in fact looking for. The context. I think that the Trump slogan of "Make America Great" is no more than the flip side of the Obama U.S. exceptionalism. Both two sides of the same white supremacist coin. The neoliberal capitalist fantasy created the conditions for Trump. But we have to understand and make sure we are clear to the people that basically the conditions that are facing working class and poor people in this country didn't start with Donald Trump, but they are the outcome of a strategy and policies instituted for the last 40 years or more. That message must be clear, because if we don't make that message clear, then we will end up propping up the hegemony of the liberal class. And what are the conditions? What are the contexts of struggle that we have to confront in building this alternative? Well, we know that there are about 143 million people in this country who are struggling, who are poor, who are part of the working class, who are attempting to just make ends meet every couple of weeks, every month. We know that there's still 38 million people still without health insurance. We know that in this country, over 30,000 people die unnecessarily because they don't have access to health care. We know that during this so-called job recovery, that 90% of the jobs developed, produced, were low-wage, part-time jobs with no benefits. We know that millions of people had dropped out of the formal sector of the economy and are now just trying to make it in the so-called gig economy. We know that black and brown mothers are experiencing maternal mortality rates that mirror the poor in the so-called global South. And we all know about the militarized police forces that engage in executions with impunity. 2 million people wake up every morning in this country in cages as part of the prison system here in this country. We know that in this country, on the southern border, that children are being snatched away from their families and put in cages like animals. We know that ICE is acting as a national Gestapo entity, producing fear and insecurity for people across this country. We know that in this country, there's no real social security, that 500,000 people go to bed or go to sleep not knowing where they're going to put their heads in security because they have no housing. This is the context that we are facing. We understand that as people in this country are told that they should be concerned about foreign meddling in our elections, that we have a consciousness in which, on the flip side of that, they will openly justify interfering in the elections and the processes of countries around the world, with the latest one being Venezuela. So this is the context of struggle, the context of confusion, the context that we have to enter into if we're serious about trying to build a movement, understanding where the people are and seeing where we can take the people once we get serious as a party. So this context, this crisis that we see here in this country, we have 3 broad areas I think that we could take a look at. First, politically. We know, and I think we heard this last night, that we are facing a crisis, a political crisis here in this country. The one thing that many of us had been looking for quite some time was this crisis in which the governing class could not govern in the old way. This was supposed to be the opportunity in which the masses organized would be able to advance our forces and really begin to move toward radical change. But of course, the objective situation we face today is that our progressive forces, our radical forces, our revolutionary forces are in fact very weak. So the ruling class is unable to govern in the old way, but we are not able to take advantage of this political opportunity. We know that in this context, this political context that we have to operate in, that over the last few decades, in particular last decade, the crisis of governance has been at every level. That even among the Democrats, they lost something like over 900 spaces to the Republicans. When we look at the crisis, many of us tend to look just at the national level. But the inroads made by the Republicans and the New Right has been at every level and in all walks of life. Reflected again in the fact that over the last decade, 900 state positions have been lost to the New Right, to the Republicans here in this country. We know that independents now make up the largest voting bloc in this country, and that over 109 million people decided not to participate in the electoral process. We know that in this country there is a growing significance among women and for the women's vote. We know this crisis has produced a situation in which the strategic importance of the black working class is quite obvious to everybody, along with the brown working class. These are the political conditions and the context that allow us to look at how we move ideologically, which is the second area that I want to touch on. As a consequence of the neoliberal capitalist policies in this country, we are facing a legitimation crisis, that people have lost faith in the social institutions, the political and economic institutions of this country. And that's why they have been quite successful in addressing that over the last 2 years, primarily using McCarthyite kinds of responses, but also they took full advantage of the ideological openings provided by this so-called Russian Gate. And I'm going to touch on that for a moment only because we need to look at the political and ideological implications of that. That what happened was, you might recall, when they started the investigation into so-called Russian Gate, what was the lead institution at first? The FBI, working with the other intelligence agencies. And the political narrative developing was that the FBI, the intelligence agencies, they are the ones that have the ability to determine the truth of so-called Russian Gate. And many of us supported that. Many people who define themselves as radicals also supported that notion that these intelligence agencies that have been responsible for interventions, political assassinations, and all kinds of dirty tricks around the world, that these agencies are now should be seen as having the confidence of the people and being able to provide us the truth. The same agencies that told us that there were WMDs in Iraq. The same agencies responsible for the murder of Dr. King and other political opponents. The same agencies responsible for the counterintelligence program that was unleashed against the Black liberation movement. But this is part of the ideological rehabilitation of the state. We all were waiting with bated breath for the Mueller report that was going to provide the definitive evidence of Russian interference. But when that didn't happen, we thought that, that would end this Russian Gate saga, but it continues. It continues because the political objective is to try to, again, shore up the ideological crisis in this country, the faith in U.S. governmental institutions. So we just have to understand how this works. They understand even more clear than sometimes we do that we are involved in an information war, a struggle for consciousness, that basically if we aren't able to be successful, then we're going to see a continuation of people giving their votes and their support to parties that don't represent their objective interests. So the terms of the struggle, we have to be clear about. We have to be absolutely clear about. We have to understand that in order for us to win in this ideological struggle, we have to be clear in our politics, that we have to have an explicit break with the logic and rationale of the neoliberal capitalist order. We have to openly reject the values of capitalism. We have to openly reject interventions on the part of the capitalist dictatorship. We have to acknowledge the reality of our intersectional lives. We have to embrace a struggle against white supremacy in all of its forms. We have to understand that for many people in this country and around the world, that we can't have any confusion about who the enemy is. We see very clearly that the enemy of the working class in this country, the enemy of the working class around the world and the oppressed, is in fact the US, EU, NATO axis of domination. We're clear about that. So what this means ideologically is that we have to ground the Green New Deal in this reality, ground it in the working class realities of the people and of the sector that we need to organize. We have to understand that the Green New Deal has to transform a reality and transcend reformism. We have to understand that and be very clear in our articulations that we have to be about system change. So the Green New Deal becomes an important instrument in moving us toward the radical change we have to realize here in this country. We have to confront this new phenomenon of left patriotism, this attempt to try to use the symbols and symbolism of the US state in a progressive way. We understand how and why people do that, but you have to understand that when you do that, you're also alienating significant sectors of this population who are still experiencing national oppression. We have to understand the consequences of left patriotism when we hear people like Elizabeth Warren talk about patriotism and the Green New Deal being a patriotic kind of program. Again, this props up ideologically the state and the system and the Democratic Party. We have to recognize another very important and painful reality, and that is that we have to transcend narrow identity politics. But the most significant identity politics, the most dangerous identity politics that must be transcended is in fact white identity politics. And we have to lay that out in that way because in the discourse we tend to believe that whiteness has no identity, that whiteness is the non-identity identity. And therefore, us to be able to construct working class unity, then it requires those of us who are not European, who are not white, to erase ourselves, to negate our historical experiences in order to come to the table of unity. And we say that is not authentic unity, and we reject that completely. So we say we have to transcend identity politics of all forms. We have to recognize that we are organizing in a political environment in which we all have different perspectives. Many of us operate from the perspective that this, in fact, is a white supremacist settler colonial state. And until we are able to effect a disruption of the continuity of the state, then we're not going to be able to bring about the kind of revolutionary change we have to bring. But we have to recognize that that is, in fact, a perspective and understand that there are peoples, people in Puerto Rico, people in Hawaii, Native people, who understand that not only are they workers, but they're also members of nationally oppressed groups. So what does all this mean? Well, the last area that we have to look at as Green Party members and supporters is the organizational question. What this means, my friends, are a few things. One is, I know that this morning we had some anti-oppression trainings, and that's good. That's part of the process of transforming ourselves, transforming the party, in order to make this party the kind of party we want to try to build. But those efforts have to be more systematic. We need to have anti-oppression trainings at the state levels, and people need to be committed to those trainings. And we know that those trainings can be very difficult sometimes, but they are absolutely necessary if we want to build an effective party. I believe that the caucus structure we have on the national level has to be duplicated on the state level. I believe that we have to have a national membership with dues payment. We know that this may require a restructuring of the national party, but think about the fact that we have many people who want to be Green Party supporters who may not be in areas where they're active chapters. We need to have a process, a mechanism by which people can relate to the party, be a national member of the party. So that means a national membership along with state memberships. We need to take a look at that seriously. Again, if we want to get a position to take advantage of the contradictions here in this country politically. We have to reassess, in my opinion, this notion that the Green Party is only an electoral party, and our main objective is to have any and everybody run under the Green Party umbrella. Friends, that's not serious, in my opinion. We have to have a process in which we move strategically. We have to have processes on the state level in which there's clear vetting of these candidates. We need to be able to move as a party in support of candidates that may have real opportunities of making a breakthrough. So if it's a congressional campaign in California or a governor's campaign in New Jersey, and we know that we have strong candidates that can make a breakthrough, we've got to be able to mobilize our resources and energy behind those candidates. We need, as we look at these people who come to us, and even as we go out to recruit, we have to be looking for people who have some grounding, some social base someplace. Too often, and see, as many of you know, I had a chance to move among the party after the campaign. Part of what we said during the campaign was that we recognized that the campaign wasn't just about 2016, but it was about building this party. And part of my commitment was that I was going to assist in trying to build the party. And so after the campaign, many of you sent invitations for me to come into your states, and I really appreciate that. And I had a chance to move across this country. And so what I'm sharing with you are my humble observations. There are people doing some serious work out there. And it's interesting because a lot of the people doing serious work don't always come to these national convenings. In fact, I was surprised to find out that a lot of people didn't even know about the national convening. But that could be changed. So what I'm sharing is that, these are some of the observations I've made. I was completely surprised by the idea that we would run candidates for a state representative position. They would garner a few thousand votes, come in second or third. One would think that the strategy then would be to use that foundation, continue to build, expand your electoral base in that area, and then run again. We know that within the context of bourgeois politics, most people have to run twice to win, But people will have a base like that and then decide their next office they want to run for is governor or the Senate. And I really, as an organizer, I really can't figure that kind of thinking out. Now, that might be good in some places, but I think we have to begin to think differently and think more strategically. Okay? We have some people that can win on a state level, but, statewide. But it may be necessary to first consider, where those openings might be on the state level. It makes no sense for us to have a national party and we have something like, one person who's in the state house, a state representative? That makes no sense, friends. That's not serious. So we need to look at this differently, in my humble opinion. One thing we have to do, though, is to make sure that these folks have a social base. We should give priority to those candidates that also come from organizations, from movements that are people of color, if you will. Again, because we need to broaden out this party. We have to think in longer terms. It's not just about the immediate election, but it's about building the party, which means we have to figure out how we build links with social movements, how we ground ourselves in our political environments, how and why it's important to show up at political events as members of the Green Party, why it can't just be about running people for office. We've got to be part of our communities. We've got to show up at the churches. We've got to be organizers. I cannot for the life of me understand why, when we know, we've seen the stats, that the sector of the population that is the most open to the Green Party message is in fact the student and youth sector. But yet we don't prioritize that sector. It makes no sense to me why we don't prioritize building campus-based chapters of the Green Party. So my friends, we just have to think about these things differently if we are going to build the party that we need to build and be positioned after 2020, once people recognize that once again they've been played, that the Democrats have opened up the door for a second term for Donald Trump. Once the insurgent Democrats, and many of them who have some decent politics, recognize that they're not going to be able to reform that party, we've got to be positioned to be able to build with these folks, not to become a Democrat Party light, but to have our values and our politics, our left values and radical politics centered, so that when these elements come to us, they understand what they're coming to. And we have what it takes. We have our values, we have our perspectives, we have our platform, and it's a progressive one. And we need to be positioned organizationally to be able to make that absorption, to be able to build and move forward. So my friends, I know that the time is short, so let me move toward a conclusion. These are the three sectors I thought that we needed to address as the Green Party, as Green Party activists. Let me conclude by saying, and this has been my refrain the entire weekend, that as we look at the issues of climate change that are very, very important, we have to connect that issue to the issue of militarism and war. These are interlocking issues, and this is an issue that belongs to this party. So let's make that a priority as we go forward. We in the Black Alliance for Peace, for example, we have said that we have to make this issue of war and militarism part of the national discourse. And so let me share briefly with you what we are going to be announcing next week. We say that this issue has to be part of the discourse. And so we are making a demand. We have a petition we're going to be releasing in which we are asking for all candidates, new candidates and incumbents, to adhere to these ideals and these principles, including all of the candidates who are running in the Green Party. And this is what we are asking the candidates to do, or demanding the candidates to do. We say that they must support efforts to cut the military budget by 50% as a first step in reducing military spending, and reallocate government spending to fully fund social programs to realize individual and collective human rights in the areas of housing, education, healthcare, green jobs, and public transportation. They must oppose the militarization of the police, and specifically for the Department of Defense 1033 program that transfers millions of dollars worth of military equipment to local police forces. They must promote the closing of the more than 800 foreign military bases and the ending of the U.S. participation in the white supremacist NATO military structure. They must call and work to close the U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, and the withdrawal of all U.S. military personnel from Africa. Demand that the Department of Justice document and investigate all instances of the use of lethal force by domestic police officers and agencies against non-white populations as demanded by various United Nations Human Rights Treaty monitoring bodies. Commit to passing resolutions at every level of government that commit the U.S. to upholding international law and the United Nations Charter, and to opposing all military, economic, including sanctions and blockades that are acts of war, and political interventions in the internal affairs of sovereign nations, regardless of the political party controlling the office of the presidency. And they must sponsor legislation and/or resolutions at every level of government, calling on the U.S. to support the United Nations resolution on the complete global abolition of nuclear weapons passed by 122 nations in July 2017. That, my friends, we believe represents the minimal program for getting our support from the people. And so I end by saying, my friends, when you understand the task we have before us, when you understand that it's not just enough to be a radical revolutionary and have the proper analysis, that one has to also embody the principles and values that we say we're about. When you understand that, you understand that we have a serious task building this party, that we have to not only have the correct analysis, we have to carry ourselves a certain kind of way. We have to relate to each other in a certain kind of way also. Because as we try to win people over to our side, the people are watching us very, very closely, and they're looking for contradictions. So my friends, we are in fact the change we are looking for. Let's assume that responsibility, and let's build the party that the people are looking for, and let's change ourselves and change reality and change the world. Thank you.
you expand upon the phrase you said, transcending reformism?
Why don't we take one more turn?
Oh, okay.
And the demands that you, the guidelines that you mentioned at the end there that presidential candidates should be in support of, where can we find those?
Good question. Basically, what I mean by transcending reformism is that we don't want to be stuck at the level of just attempting to make incremental changes to the system. That we recognize that ultimately we're not going to be able to address climate change. We're not going to be able to realize our full human rights within the context of the existing system. And therefore, we have to look at even programs like the Green New Deal as transitional programs where we are making certain kinds of demands, but we shouldn't see this as an end in itself. That, for example, we know that, we talked about it yesterday in the workshop, that the energy companies that are salivating at the prospect of expanding oil production and use by 40% over the next decade, they're not going to just stand aside and let us build an alternative movement. Therefore, we have to recognize that we are involved in a struggle, and in fact, a class struggle, okay? And that that means we have to move toward taking the ability of these powerful interests, the oil companies and automobile companies, the pharmaceutical companies, taking their power away, their ability to put a brake on our progressive motion and bring that power to the people. Because again, we're not talking about the complete radical transformation of all of the social institutions and structures of this country, then basically we kind of just BSing and propping up the status quo. On the demands, we're going to have this on the on the BAP website next week. We have a petition that reflect those demands. We also have a pledge form that will reflect those same demands that we are requiring all of these politicians to in fact sign on to. So we are building a whole campaign around this as part of our campaign against domestic repression in this country. Oh, the website is blackallianceforpeace.com.
Great. So we have a second microphone. Thank you, Michael. So we have Bruce. Anybody else that wants to ask a question?
John, if you can articulate or discuss a concern that's consistently out there with white privilege trying to define what resistance should be, especially for oppressed communities, and why, in addition to electoral politics and these other things, why we need to be more involved in disruption and direct action.
Thank you. I think that disruption and direct action is very important, and they're important building blocks. But we have to be very careful about that in terms of that being taken away from also the energy of the follow-up. And the follow-up has to be organizing people. We know that in this country, we are quite, we've been conditioned to respond to the spectacle. And we will sometimes get confused by these spectacles. We thought we had something called a resistance here in this country after Trump was elected. But that so-called resistance was no more than a 2-year-long get out the vote process for the Democrats. So if we want to be serious about white privilege and perpetuation of white nationalist interests, reflected in the capitalist dictatorship that we have, that we have to build a revolutionary movement. And that means having clear politics and clear objectives and understanding what we have to do in order to realize those objectives.
Thank you. Could you please elucidate any specific improvements you might suggest to internal Green Party relationships to make us be the change we want to be more than we already are?
Thank you. I think one thing I touched on was the fact they're trying to keep people safe. That we have to really be honest enough to recognize some of our shortcomings as it relates to this party being able to realize its potential and being able to attract and hold people who have different kinds of experiences than we do. That means we have to be serious about understanding oppression, understanding different experiences people have in this country, and being able to engage folks who have different kinds of experiences. So that is one thing. The other thing is the structural issues that, I try to not get too heavily involved in some of the internal struggles within the Green Party, but I do see stuff from time to time, and I'm quite surprised, and sometimes I'm quite appalled by the tone of it. It goes beyond policy struggles, and it becomes quite personal, and sometimes very immature. So. We all have to work with folks. We have to, if we keep politics in command, then we can struggle with one another over political differences around strategies or tactics or whatever, and they don't have to become personal. And many of y'all might recall that, right after the campaign, there was a slight difference between myself and Jill Stein regarding, the follow-up stuff. What was that thing? Recount, yeah. But that did not undermine our ability to work together. When people saw us, together at events after that, people wonder why we thought you all had some kind of issue. No, the bigger objective is building this party. And, I will always stand with Jill Stein because, some of y'all know some of the stuff that happened with the party as it relates to me. I mean, there was significant pressure on the campaign and the party because of crazy Ajamu, and people gave her opportunities from the CNN town hall to other environments to sort of distance herself from crazy Ajamu. But she never did. She never did. So, we have to check our tone. We have to keep the struggle, the engagement at the level of the policies and principles, and try to the extent that we can. I know it's difficult to avoid all of the other kinds of things that come in as flawed human beings that we are. Thank you.